Okay, we are already some 50 people in the room, so I think it's time for us to formally start this. I would like to introduce Professor McLean by telling you a little bit about why we consider this moment so special. If I can call him so, earned his bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering at Cornell University. He graduated in '58. He then served the U.S. Army National Guards as an ordnance officer, and he left service as a captain in 1973. If that's one of the questions that he's going to ask, what were you doing in '73? I will say I was in kindergarten. He worked for Procter & Gamble for 7 years, first in manufacturing management, and later, beginning in 1962, as a computer system analyst. Yes, in 1962, Procter & Gamble already had computer system analysts, which may be amusing to some of you, but it only shows that we as information systems have been around for quite a while. In '65, Eve left Procter & Gamble and entered the Sloan School of Management at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT, where he earned his doctorate in '69. In the fall of '69, he joined the Graduate School of Management at UCLA in California, where he stayed until the '80s when he moved to Georgia and started working at Georgia State University, where he's been since. He has been a visiting professor at many universities around the world. I could name here University of South Australia, the Erasmus University in the Netherlands, Izadi Business School in Spain, and Alexandria Institute of Technology in Egypt. Professor McLean has published over 135 articles in publications such as Harvard Business Review, Law Management Review, California Management Review, Communications of the ACM, Information Systems Research, Management Science, MIS Quarterly, MISQ Executive, Journal of the MIS, European Journal of Information Systems Database, and the proceedings of our most prestigious conferences in IIS. I can name here, of course, ISIS, ESIS, HICS, and AMSIS, many of which he was the founder or one of the founders. He may have something to say about that during this talk. And he has even given speeches to us in ISLA, our Latin American conference. His information systems research paper that he co-authored with one of his students, William DeLone, on information systems success is a big hit. Most of you have studied it somewhere during your contact with information systems, and it's one of the most cited IS research papers of all times. Well, having said that about Professor McLean, please be very welcome. I told you that it would take us a few minutes until we got our audience, but we are all here in the room and very anxious to hear from you. Thank you very much for being with us, Eve.
Thank you, Alex. I'm looking forward to this opportunity. Yes, technology can be challenging. And so the fact is that several years ago, I was talking to many of your colleagues in Latin America in a phone line and a still picture, et cetera, that was not exactly is what we might hope for. So today I'd like to be interactive. I'm going to go through a number of things that happened over history, and that I'm going to leave time at the end for questions. But if you're confused about something, if you want some clarification and you'd like to make a comment, then we can certainly let you break in to say, could you clarify that, or did I didn't understand what that was? So I would like to go through it generally, but if you have questions, I can certainly stop and respond. And that was a very nice introduction that Alex gave me. Thinking back, I know my mother would have been very pleased to hear that. And so, but actually that you may recall back in the 2008, 9, 10, we had the Great Recession. We know what had happened to the stock market, what had happened to things around the world. The Great Recession, well, I went through that, but actually I was born in the Great Depression. And in the 1930s, and of course, in, 4 weeks, I'll be 85 years old. And so, of course, still working. And, but again, when I think back that period, I remember when we were living in Annapolis, Maryland, and my mother said, Daddy is not going to be able to be coming home. And I said, why not? And she said, because the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor and he's leaving us to go to sea as an officer in the Navy. And I was 6 years old, but I remember vividly the outbreak of World War II. And so my father left and came back 44 months later from his time in the war. And so remembering that, where most people said, World War II, don't you mean Vietnam? Don't you mean Korea, etc.? No, I'm talking about World War II. So that's my perspective. Seen a lot happen. And but I'm glad in particular to be able to be with you to talk about what's happened in IT. And we say, where were you there when? That's just a way of trying to get us to think back some of these events that occurred many years ago. In particular, what's the value of those past occurrences to what we're doing today? In other words, people say, well, why do we have ISIS in December? That doesn't seem like a good time of year. Well, there's a history of that, and it helps understand why it is in December. And so those are the things I hope you will, not because we want to necessarily relive history, but I think history gives us an example of things that are relevant for us today. So I'll use this question, were you there? That is, what was happening then? What was occurring? And I say, that you can raise your hand and think about, any of you ever see the movie Forrest Gump? And remember, he was seemed to be everywhere. If an important event had happened in history, Forrest Gump was able to be there. He didn't necessarily change things, but he was there. And so people have said, I'm the Forrest Gump of the IS field. I didn't invent the internet. That was something I'm talking about. But a lot of things happened while I was there, and I want to share what I saw and heard while I was there. So going through, think of that, I was like a fly on the wall, listening to things and occasionally making things happen. So first of all, a timeline. Alex mentioned that I had been working at Procter & Gamble, as I say, after engineering at Cornell. When the Army got out of the Army. Interesting enough, my post in the Army was the Aberdeen Proving Grounds for the U.S. Army Ordnance, where I was stationed. And that is where the first computer bought by the military was located. And that computer was being used to do artillery shells trajectory calculations. I didn't get to work on that, but I was right there at Aberdeen, where in fact that very first Army computer was installed. So because if you may recall, that was after Korea and before Vietnam, and we had that nice period in which there was peace in the world. And so therefore, that as they said, well, we don't have any wars fighting, and so what can we do with you? They said, well, how about would you like to teach? And so they put me on the faculty of the U.S. Army Ordnance School, and my service was as a teacher. So when we talk about that, that was a long time ago that I began teaching, in this case, to soldiers in the U.S. Army. So I say that when I got out of the Army, went to work for Procter & Gamble, that was my beginning. I was doing manufacturing, making soap for Procter & Gamble, and they said, we need to take someone from the factory and get them started so we can employ computers in manufacturing. And so that they did a survey. They said, looks like McLean, who was working in New York, might be a good candidate. And they sent me to Cincinnati to start my computing studies with Procter & Gamble. That was in 1962. And as a result of that time at corporate headquarters of Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, I came back to install systems. And the very first application was a 1,200-man factory payroll on a 4K card machine. We heard later that they actually had one that was be 8K, double the storage, and we all thought, wow, wouldn't that have been wonderful? That was a machine, by the way, that cost $500,000 and has less logic than my wristwatch does now. So therefore, what I'm talking about, there were some developments in the field that took place before I entered it. That's why I'm saying it was the pre-ETH era. And the first question I have is, what was the first business application on a computer? So if you could think about that in your textbooks, they must have talked about the history of computing. What was the very first application for business on the computer?
People always think of ENIAC, but that's not for business, right?
No, that's what the Army used for shell trajectory calculations. Some people talk about the payroll of the General Electric in Lexington, Kentucky, and that's a little bit later as the first business application, GE's payroll. The answer is, in 1953, there was a tea shop chain in England, and they were Lyons tea shops. And they wondered, is it possible that this new computer that we've heard about at Cambridge University could help us do with our ordering? Because the amount the teas we sell in the winter are different than the teas we sell in the summer. And sometimes we run out of certain teas because we're not tracking the preferences over time of year. Is it possible this new machine could actually help us manage reordering, stocking, and the files of our Lyons tea shops? So the question is, well, who knows anything about it? Who do we turn to? And there's an interesting story, I'll tell you about that in a moment. But so they decided they would create the Lyons Electronic Office, or LEO for short. So the LEO was the world's first business application on a computer in the United Kingdom, England, not the US, and that was in 1953. And so now a little bit about this. The question is, well, what software do we have to run on the computer at Cambridge University? Well, we just have the basic assembler code. We don't have any special things like that. They said, well, who knows anything about it? And so they looked around to see who might be useful to be able to create this electronic office. And they came across 5 women who'd gotten math degrees from Cambridge University. They were having a hard time finding a job. The answer was, well, would you want to be a clerk? Did you want to work in a shop? And they said, well, I'd like to be able to use my mathematical skills. And so Lyons hired these women to, first of all, learn the base code of the machine at the University of Cambridge, and then code this applications for Lyons office. And so the point of this story is, were you listening? The world's first business application was written by 5 women. And clearly that we don't recognize that. We think about Lady Lovelace, who worked with Babbage in terms of the 1830s and 1840s, that a lot of her thinking, Lady Lovelace's thinking, went into Babbage's creation for the analytical engine. It was never built. We needed another half a century to get actually the equipment. But certainly, Lady Lovelace was one of the pioneers in the thought. But these 5 women, frankly, nameless, because when they actually launched the Lyons office, etc., they weren't even invited to the launching. And yet, they were really the ones that had created that. And I heard this story from a visit we'd had here in Atlanta to a prelate, a bishop, an archbishop of the Anglican Church. And he was visiting, and I was supposed to host him for lunch, which I did, with his wife. And as they were talking religion about this Episcopal bishop, I asked what his wife asked me what I did. I said, I teach computers. She said, oh, that's interesting. Because I had some experience a number of years ago doing things for the Lyons tea shops. I said, you mean the Leo system? And she rolled back and she said, you know about Leo? I said, yes, I do. She said, well, I was one of the 5 ladies that built the code, that ran the systems that created the Leo system. And so here it was, I had a bit of system history across the table for our luncheon. And she gave me the details of what they did to have to go through and create a working language, having a code that actually would do the print operations and the file operations, etc. I actually had a chance to meet with her, one of those 5 ladies, premiers, who had started the first application. So
Forrest Gump was there.
With that?
Forrest Gump was there.
That was in 1953. And in fact, 50 years later, in 2003, they had a celebration for the Leo system, and many of the people brought back. In fact, I have a colleague who went to that celebration. It was in the uh, uh, City Hall in London, which is an elegant structure, and the whole celebration was of the half a century of the Leon Economic Office had started, and how, in fact, it had led the world in terms of business application of computing. And so that was a wonderful celebration. I wish I could have been there, but I know some people that were there who also told me of, in fact, how excited they were. So one of the things we've done is that when in AIS wanted to actually recognize people who were outstanding, they said, why don't we call this outstanding faculty award the Leo Award? And so if you've ever been to an ISIS conference, you hear about people being recognized as being a Leo winner. The word Leo is from Leon's electronic office. Leon's economic, I keep saying economic, electronic office. So that started it really all off. And so the next question, as we think back in history, when was the first computer used in a business school course? And so in 1953, we had the Leon's electronic office, and also the GE's application in Kentucky. So we had a few of them. The question, how about in the business school? Well, you probably haven't heard of the SWAC. SWAC was the National Bureau of Standards Western Automatic Calculator. It was an octal machine that was experimental, but actually we were able to get one at UCLA in 1955. And so this SWAC computer, a colleague of mine at UCLA, Clay Sproul's, was a professor of statistics in the business school. And he said, I'm wondering, can I use this SWAC computer to actually teach statistics? In particular, that he used to like to go to the racetracks and bet on the horses. And he thought, I bet you I can use this computer to handicap the horses at Hialeah. And so he announced, of course, there was going to be how to handicap the races at Hialeah racetrack using the SWAC computer. The class filled up. And so that was the first business school course to actually use any computer, in this case, the SWAC computer. Now, something else happened because of our pioneering at UCLA. A year or two earlier, IBM had said, we want to, as we move into the computing field from the old data processing field, we'd like to get involved with some major universities. And so they made a grant of $10 million to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and for the application of computing within MIT. So the people at UCLA said, well, wait a second, IBM, you've given $10 million to an Eastern institution, which is an engineering school, and that it will be, and it's a private university, college. So we said, you should balance that. You gave the money to a private university in the East, give it to a public university in the West, UCLA. You gave it to an engineering school at MIT, give it to the business school at UCLA. And so that, so as a result, they gave in 1955, $10 million and IBM equipment to create a huge data center. It was a data center for the entire West Coast in 55. The Stanford did their computing at UCLA through a remote batch mode. The National University of Mexico used computing there, the Air Force Academy. So the innovation with a business school use of computing brought a $10 million gift to UCLA to create the WDPC, Western Data Processing Center, was established. So as a result of that earlier work, 2 years later, that the Western Data Processing Center was created. Clay Sproul's, the one that had introduced the business school application, was the one who was made the director. And from that became a number of people that got their graduate degrees. I know of two or three people at Harvard came from UCLA because of the early work in computing at UCLA. So now going forward there, if we think about computing, how was actually work done on equipment before computing were introduced? And the answer is EAM, electronic accounting machines. So while I was working at Procter & Gamble, that we looked at the payroll, and so how was the calculations done? There were no programs, no code. They were wired boards. And so one of my first tasks was to take a EAM, electronic accounting machine board, and it had a bunch of holes, and you what's go wire from here to here, from the storage area to the processor and back again. So actually what you would think of as a program was actually a wiring diagram. And so that's how calculations were done on business machines before 1961. And as I say, my first job was actually wiring an EAM application with taking wires and moving it from here to here, plugging them here to here, and making sure that therefore the wire connections were good and that I hadn't miscounted the holes, etc. So that was the application there. Now, about the same time that many of you may be a member of ACM, which the Association for Computing Machinery. It started in the early 60s. And the question was, what kind of applications was ACM and its members being concerned with? The answer is almost entirely scientific. In fact, all the software for statistics at UCLA in the School of Public Health were then built, and several of the people who had actually done the scientific calculation to create that software for doing statistics came together to form ACM. So therefore, it was pretty much devoted to scientific computing. But some people, again, in Los Angeles, said, what about business? And the people that ran ACM said, what do you mean business? Well, therefore, you're not very much concerned about data. All your applications are core resident, and therefore, you don't really think about storage devices, doing searches on tapes, and storage and retrieval. And they said, well, who cares about that? That doesn't sound very interesting scientifically. And the answer is, they say business cares about that. And so we think we need to have a society for business data processing. And ACM said, well, how many people are interested? And they did an informal survey, and they found hundreds of people that wanted a business application society. And so therefore, that they said, all right, don't leave, don't form your own society. Why don't we have special interest groups, SIGs, within ACM, and that therefore you can specialize in the special interest group. And so that in 1961, ACM changed their charter. In addition to having members, they also had SIGs. And we thought that the special interest group on business data processing, which they pronounced SIGBDIP, don't you love it? It's unpronounceable, but it's SIGBDIP, was going to be the first ACM special interest group. But it turns out the statisticians at UCLA beat them by 3 months. And they had a SIG on scientific calculations, which was the first SIG, and SIGBDIP was the second SIG, founded in Los Angeles. And since that time, of course, SIG-MIS has grown. At one point, it had over 10,000 members. But interesting enough, because it dealt with data, it dealt with programming, it dealt with applications, all of those spun off, and they had a separate SIG for data, a separate SIG for computer personnel. And so as a result, that a lot of the people that were originally part of SIGBDIP have gone to their own special SIGs. And now ACM has, I think, over 30 different unique SIGs for all the special interest group. But thinking about that, special interest groups were founded by a group of business data processors who then created SigmaDip. And now, of course, we know what they've changed the name from SigmaDip to SigMIS. All right, now we're getting near the end. When was the first business computer? Not a business school application, but an actual computer that was built for business. And in fact, a little thing is, what's the difference between a business computer and a scientific computer? This is going to be on the quiz. Does anyone know the difference between a business computer and a scientific computer? Well, in the architecture, a business computer is a character machine. It will actually take in hexadecimal notation, it will store a 7 or a 4 or an A or a B. A scientific computer uses words, where you actually have a 32-bit word, a 64-bit word, 128-bit word, etc. And so that they decided that for business applications, dealing with discrete numbers rather than statistical approximations, which is the word is, they decided they would create them. That was the IBM 1401. It was introduced in 1962. So that was the pre-ETH, and so it was introduced at Procter & Gamble. We did, I worked on my first application. I think I mentioned that to you. That was the payroll. I was working at the soap factory in Staten Island, New York, and they had the old EAM payroll, and they wanted to replace it with a new payroll. And so we programmed that on the 1401 in 1962. And when I tell that story to my students in the class, they say, 1962? I wasn't even born yet. Guy next to him says, heck, my father wasn't even born yet. And so therefore, if you're following along, you might ask around the room, I think, how many people were alive, born before 1962, which is in fact when that first computer was introduced. And as I say, it had 4K. Yes, sir.
I would say at least one person would have been born before 62. You.
That's what I mean, but that's exactly right. And so and at that point, I was in my late 20s, and so that so in fact, I remember we were in the computer center in Cincinnati, and it's and it was filled with computers, not only with 1401s, but with a 7,000 scientific computing, clack clack, making a lot of noise, and then all of a sudden, over the PA, a notice came over, and it got very, very quiet. And people sort of stopped what they were doing. And we said, this was a notice from Dallas, Texas, that President Kennedy has been assassinated. And I was in that data center, and everything stopped, and it was deadly silence, etc., where people listened to this announcement, say, and where I was in a data center in Procter & Gamble when that notice came over the wire. And so, again, another historic event where I was listening to in a IT context. So that the IBM 1401, and then they had a newer model of 1410, but at the time, more 1401s were sold than all the other computers in the world combined. That was the impact of that initial business computer. And so that's what I worked on. It had a cycle time of 11.4 microseconds. It had storage of 4,000 positions, or the big model had 8,000 positions of storage. And the operating system was 2 card images, 160 characters, 280 character cards contain the entire operating system of the 1401. It basically, it turned it on. And of course, we didn't have tapes, we didn't have discs. And so therefore we would punch in, and these 2 initializing cards would set up the machine. And then we would run in the program, followed by the data on the cards. And we didn't have enough storage. So we would print out a second batch of cards, which were intermediate results. Then we take those, put them back in, and it took 9 pass of cards to get a paycheck, and 3 more passes of a set of cards to get the payroll register. And in fact, we just wished we could have something more than that. But therefore, that was the way computing was done in that first application, which took, as I say, and tens of thousands of cards were used every day just to be able to process the payroll on a quarterly basis. Now, the other thing that they wanted to use it for was to transmit from the East Coast and the West Coast to the corporate headquarters in Cincinnati, where they would actually consolidate all of the computing around the corporation into one set of applications in Cincinnati. And so therefore, in addition to our doing the payroll and also the production figures and the sales figures from the East Coast would be sent to Cincinnati for central processing, summarizing, and then sent back for the various shipping points across the country. So we had an order shipping billing system. It was installed in 1965. That was the entire corporation integrated together in one set of systems in a nationwide network. When I talk to other people, you say in 1964, 65, they had that network. I said, absolutely. And if you haven't heard about it, it's because Procter & Gamble is so careful about its corporate secrets, they did not allow anyone to talk about it. And what it meant was that we would, on that IBM, we would send all of the results of the business activities at the plant in New York, as was and there were another dozen around the country doing the same thing, all sent to there, where they had a scientific computer, which is 7,000 that the 1401 talked to, would then do all of the corporation's business, send shipping papers and documents back to the plants to be distributed to the customers in a 24-hour period. And so one of the things about this was they asked me to create a report for the CEO of the results of this overnight processing. And so I said, fine. And so my task was to take the entire business of Procter & Gamble, everything they made, toilet goods, soap products, paper products, all those goods, everything that they had produced, sold, and delivered in the last 24 hours, summarized in a 1-page report. And so the top page said, what did we do as a corporation for soap products? The middle part of the page, what did we do for paper products? And the bottom part of the page did for the food products, paper, food, and soap. And that was printed out and was on the desk of the CEO the following morning. So people said, we talk about real-time system, 1963, 64, CEO has on his desk a complete report of everything the corporation had done as of the preceding day. And so clearly innovative for even not a companies can't claim they have that comprehensive a system. And so after having produced the report, I went up to visit the CEO, and his office was huge. I was intimidated. I walked across this huge office, and then I talked to his secretary, and they said, oh, you're here to see the Mr. McElroy, Neil McElroy. And I said, yes. He said, I want to follow up on the report that I produced for him to as of the preceding day. He said, oh, that report. I said, well, how does he like it? Was it laid out right? Was the information clear? She said, well, he never sees it. What? She said, this is the executive suite. I could never put a printout on his desk. He wouldn't look at a printout. So I come in a few minutes early. I take your printout and I type it out on my executive secretary. And so it's all typed in nice column. In fact, I want to compliment you. I use the same stops on my typewriter that you used in your columns on your report. And so therefore, I give a typed, neat copy of your report. And he loves it. Yes, if I'm late retyping it, he asks, where is that report? So literally, we created a system on the 1401 and the 7000, which tracked the activity of Procter & Gamble as a corporation as of the close of the preceding day in 1963, 64. Really, really pioneer. So now that I should have finished to say that what happened about that line of business computers, the answer is that, Well, I'll come back to that in a moment, because another occurrence was, as popular as that was, it became obsolete in about 3 or 4 years. That's computing for you. Okay, now, all right, what else? What about technology? Well, we were working. I was complaining that we had tapes, but we didn't have anything for storage. And so when was the first disk storage device created? And I'm saying the answer was, it was the IBM 305 RAMAC. That's Random Access Machine for Automatic Calculations. Don't you love it? 1962, Procter & Gamble bought one of these RAMACs. They said, random access. We said, no, it's not random. It's a direct access device, but they liked RAM better than the other. And so, and it had 3 million characters of storage. And they said, the pad, 3 million, anything you ever want to know, you just make a query and you get the answer out. We realized that 3 million didn't go very far at all. But so that was, and so we worked on that. I worked on that 305 RAMAC and Procter & Gamble, the first disk storage device that IBM had made, and we were using it at Procter & Gamble. Okay. Now, I mentioned that we had scientific machines, 7,000 line scientific machines. They were word machines, and we had the 1401, which were character machines. And there was a lot of confusion. And so IBM created a new architecture, a new family of computers. It was the 360 architecture. The idea, like the compass, 360 degrees, this will be good for everything. And what they did was they looked at character machines, the 1401, the scientific machines. They said the potential in the future moves away from character notation to word machines. And so it started with a 64 word machine and then a 128 machine. And so that new architecture was launched in April of 1963. And I remember sitting in the room and we were told that therefore that all the computers we have, the 7,000 line, obsolete, the 1400 line, obsolete. And they're going to be replaced by a systems 30, 40, 50, 60, and 65, a whole family of computers of increasing power, and that these will be launched over the next 2 years. And so then the question came is, what do we program on? And they said, well, we'll continue our present systems until each of the models of the 360 line is actually announced and delivered. And so I said, well, then the applications we're thinking of working on here at Procter & Gamble in the factory, what will we be doing? They said, well, we've got a couple to finish up, but we don't want to launch anyone new because we want to take advantage of the new architecture. And I said, well, given the fact that now I was the systems analyst in the factory, I said, what do I work on? If you're postponing new applications, they said, what'd you do before you went into computing? I said, I make soap. Well, then go back to make soap. And I thought I'd have a wonderful run of the last 3 or 4 years doing computing. I thought I was good at it. And I thought, you're saying I'm going back to making soap? Maybe there's a future for me doing something else. And so I listened to that and I made up my mind that year that I'm going to think about leaving Procter & Gamble, actually getting a degree so I might be able to teach about information systems, and that and therefore I would leave the new family of applications for Procter & Gamble to someone else. So as we were thinking, my question is if I'm going to teach information systems, what kind of doctoral programs are there for MIS as opposed to computer science in the country? And the answer is 1965 at MIT Sloan School. That was the first MIS doctoral program, and the doctoral program at the University of Minnesota was founded shortly thereafter. They sometimes say they were the first, but actually they were the second. The first was MIT's MIS program. And so I saw that. So I left Procter & Gamble to join that program to get my master's degree. So I was class of 67 to get my master's degree. And then I said, I almost went to work with McKinsey & Company because they said, you've got a master's degree from MIT. You've got 7 or 8 years of experience at Procter & Gamble. You're worth your weight in gold. And so I said, well, I know it'd be exciting to be a McKinsey consultant, but I said, I really like to teach. He said, why do you want to teach? He said, I think I can make a difference in the future generation of managers. They said, well, all right, you teach, and assume you do a good job teaching to a student, maybe he'll be able to put your ideas into practice in 5 or 10 years. You come to work with us at McKinsey, you give advice on Friday, they will implement it on Monday. don't you want to have that kind of impact? I said, and of course, the pay was also a factor. But I decided, no, I really like the idea. And so in 1967, I entered the doctoral program. And of course, many of you in the audience are master's students and doctoral students. I'd already done my master's thesis. And now I was looking at doing a doctoral dissertation. And I thought, oh, I'm broke. I need to get a job. And so I said, I'm going to work. And so I started the doctoral program, and 26 months later, I had my PhD. So it usually takes 4 to 5 years. I just said, having had the practice of doing a master's thesis is that therefore, in fact, my master's thesis was about 250 pages. I really learned how to be more concise. My PhD dissertation was 110 pages. And so the point was, so therefore, that was when I went to MIT. And as I think I explained that I was there at MIT till 69. And then 69, I was looking for a job. And that's when I left to go to UCLA, where I left there in 69. And then came back to the East to Georgia State in 87. So that chapter there. So let's think about what else happened in 1969. That's 51 years ago. That's just over half a century ago. Think about, was anything special? Well, Neil Armstrong became the first man on the moon. So therefore, and again, going back to the first issue of Database still in public, is the oldest business-oriented publication in computing and continued existing. In 1969, their first issue of Database was published, and I have that copy of that first issue in my library at the university. And in fact, I have every single issue of Database since then. And my wife said, you're not going to take them home when you leave your office. And I'm looking for a home. If someone would like to have a complete set of databases for half a century, they're available for free. So anyway, now, but the next thing is DARPA, which is the Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, have been working with a number of universities, but they said, at UCLA, I had a colleague named was Len Kleinrock. And Len Kleinrock, if we have the Nobel Prize for Science, the Erickson Prize for Computing was set up. He won the Erickson Prize for inventing packet switching. If you think about the internet, how essential packet switching is, he invented that at UCLA. And so that in 1969, therefore, the first step of the internet was a transmission from UCLA to Stanford. And Len got on the computer and he was going to log in, and he started typing LOGIN. He got as far as the L. It crashed. Alex, like we had yesterday, right? It crashed. And so
they doing the same, right? We're repeating history.
Yeah, and so it crashed. And so he got on the phone and they said, check your settings, check that thing. And they checked back and they said, oh, we had a misconnection. So let's start again. And then the second time he actually got on, and that was the first on the ARPANET, the first internet transmission in history. And so interesting though, Neil Armstrong, when he went to the moon, why he said, one step for man, one step for mankind. And so my friend Lee, he said, that doesn't sound very elegant. All I did was L, and then it got through. He said, oh, no. What that stood for, lo and behold. So actually he had typed LO and it crashed. So lo and behold, look what we have wrought. And he talked to the paper. And so the newspaper said, yes, the first internet transmission was a lo and behold, we now have a new transmission. So it's a bit of, he was very good with publicity, etc., to get that first ARPA trend. So 1969, and I was already at UCLA, so I was there. And Len Kleinrock, who made that transmission, described to me how that went from UCLA to Stanford, creating the internet 51 years ago. Oh, and by the way, continuing on in terms of our questions, I mentioned there were a number of SIGs. Well, many of us think about computing in terms of the technical aspects, but there's a a lot of research being done about the human aspects, computer personnel. And so that as database had been published back in 1961, computer personnel was established in 1973. And again, they had a specialist group on computer personnel. They published a journal called Computer Personnel. And for many years, people that were in SIG MIS and SIG Computer cooperated, and they would have joint meetings and joint proceedings. And a lot of the work that computer personnel came up with went on to the Database Magazine, and other people that wanted to focus on the human side, they put it in computer personnel. So if you were in ACM, that you might have heard of Computer Personnel Research and their journal by the same name. Now, I was at UCLA, and that I came across a microcomputer, the first microcomputer that IBM made. And that not the Apple, but it was the IBM 5100 and later the 5110. It had 64K. It had its own built-in operating system with either BASIC or APL, two different languages, and it fit on top of a desk. So I said, that looks slick. And they said, can we get one? And so the answer was yes. So it was just been introduced. It cost $25,000 for this microcomputer. And so the question was, it was getting near the year end. And those of you who understand budgets, and you find that there is a little bit money unspent in the budget, and it's near the end, what do? You spend it, right? And so I said, do you have 25,000? I think we do. And so I grabbed that money before it was expired in the budget. We bought the 5100. I put it on a little cart, and I would reel the cart into classroom and conduct the class in business use of computing on a 5100. And it had two features. It would both standalone mode, or it had communication. And so therefore, if I wanted to grab data, I could actually go out and grab data from the central campus computer and then run it locally and back and forth. So I had an interactive connection to the campus computing as well as a standalone capability in class in 1976. In fact, and I focused on the computer language APL, which stands for A, programming language, kind of cute, right? APL. And that, because it has some unique features, I started to use that as the standard language which you taught in the classroom. And IBM was so pleased, they said, would you take that classroom use of APL and create a course which you would bring faculty around the country. So we had a week-long course, and I taught 30 faculty from all over the United States how to use APL in the classroom on business applications. And I know many people said, yeah, actually, I remember back when we were all at UCLA in 76, 77, when you taught us how to use APL on the computer for classroom use. So now we're moving forward in time, and what's happening over in India today? ISIS. So therefore, we're in the midst of ISIS.
It's actually happening all over the place, right? Because India was supposed to be the place, but it's all over. It's virtual.
That's right. And so therefore, it's listed as Hyderabad, but of course, it's virtual worldwide. And so, how did AIS get started? Where was that? So in 1979, there was a group of people from TIMS, the Institute for Management Sciences, had a meeting in Denver, and it was a small group, and these were all business faculty. They were lamenting that the only conference that we could go to was the conference on computer science or management science, and neither really were really ideal for information systems. And we were all sort of saying, well, I go to ACM's conferences sometimes, I go to TIM's conferences sometimes, but neither of them really fit the needs that we're trying to do in business school. So I said, we've been whining and complaining about a lack of a forum for business faculty to teach IS. Let's just do it. So what do you mean? I said, if you will come, I will host a meeting at UCLA. And if you will pay your way to get here, you get some funds for that, I will put you up here and pay the cost of your time here. And so therefore, so the answer was that, again, from that pioneering work of microcomputers at UCLA, I was able to start for ISIS. And so I have a couple of slides in between. I jumped ahead. We were talking about MIS Quarterly. The answer is that when all these developments, et cetera, with database and computer personnel, one was a quarterly founded, after all, devoted to the idea of business applications. And that was founded in 1977 at the University of Minnesota. And so Minnesota had a very large MIS program over the years. And so the quarterly was one of the things that they created there in combination with the Society for Information Management, SIM. And so they had a business sponsor, SIM, and a academic sponsor, the university. And so that started. And in fact, I was one of the founding editors of the quarterly. And so they had, it was interesting. It was structured that it would be half the issue would be research applications and half would be business applications. And so the idea was that they would be so I was one of the original associate editors for research, and they had others that were business leaders who were going to be associate editors for practice. And if you wonder whatever happened, well, that so the first issues had the section on applications and the section on research. The problem was, where would you expect to get applications from? Universities or industry? And so they were thinking that business leaders or technical leaders would write articles for that. They said, we don't write articles, we do business. And so they quickly realized that there were very few papers coming from industry. And if a faculty member had deemed to put one of his papers in the application section, there goes his tenure. The only thing that counted was being in the research section. And so what I've described was the founding of the quarterly, which had the dual purpose of professional relevance to applications and research relevance through, in fact, the research that went away after half a dozen years. But that's where it was, that was founded, et cetera. And another thing happened at the same time, about when we talked about business, the first book on IS planning. Again, I partnered with a partner of McKinsey, John Soden, and McKinsey was saying that we're getting a lot of our clients asking, how do we plan for IS? We have corporate plans, but IS planning is something that therefore we're wrestling with a lot of our clients. And so McKinsey turned to UCLA, to George Steiner, who had written a book on long-range planning, 2 volumes. It was the definitive work on planning. Steiner's works on planning. And so they asked Steiner, I said, you did a book on corporate planning. Is there anyone out there that does anything on IT planning? He said, well, I've got I was young then, a young colleague, McLean, who's working in that era. And so McKinsey approached me and John Soden said, would you have a conference? And so we did a conference when we invited IBM, we invited the state of California, we invited Mobil Oil, we invited the Federal Reserve. We had about 24 leading companies that were thought to do good work in IS planning. And out of that came Strategic Planning for MIS, published in 1977. And I find that book is still kicking around places. 10 years later, I was doing some consulting for Cathay Pacific Airlines, and I was talking to the CIO, and he said, you know, I find your name interesting, Ephraim. I've never known anyone by the name of Ephraim. He said, oh, except this book I have. I said, yeah. He reached over out of the drawer in his desk, pulled out the book. There it was, Strategic Planning for MIS by Ephraim, McLean, and John Soden. He said, is that you? I said, yep. He said, it's my Bible. Would you
later, right, Urban?
What's that?
You ended up working with another Ephraim later.
Yes, that's right. And so that, yes, later on, Ephraim Turbin, our textbook. But so that, so anyway, that he said, would you autograph it? And I was glad to do it. So that is the very first book on planning. And once people said, why don't you do a new one? I said, it turns out that where technology is rapidly changing, planning is much more stable. And so that book was actually successful for, about 10 or 15 years. And in fact, I was very pleased because IBM, in their course on business systems planning, bought copies of my book. And so IBM bought over 11,000 copies of my book as a free handout to people that took IBM's course on business systems planning, which we, of course, said nice things about in the book. So, all right, then now here's where I pick up where I said before that we had a meeting in Denver. I said, will you come to UCLA in next May? And so in May of 1980, about 30 faculty from all over the country came to UCLA. I hosted the meeting, and we said, we're not computer scientists, we're not management scientists, we're information systems specialists, and we need to have our own conference, a CIS. So we decided that we would have a conference on information system. The next question was, well, where will we hold it? And and more particularly, when will we have it? And we said, we've got 7 months from May to December. If we want to have it this year, it's going to have to be December. And so people ask, December, it's a terrible time. It's, of course, it's nice and warm down in Latin America, but it's cold and it's snowing, etc. Why would you have a conference then? And the answer is that we need a lot of work to create a conference out of whole cloth. And so therefore, that we decided that we need as much time as possible, but we still had to be within this year. And so it obviously became actually in an American framework after Thanksgiving, which is the end of November, and before Christmas. And we discovered that a lot of hotels before Christmas, but after that will give you good rates. And so we were lucky to be able to have some very nice hotels. And the first one we had was at the Wharton School. We were
one with the terrible weather.
It was, and in fact, not only that we have weather, but the Wharton School is not in the best section of town, and so it was we had it at a Holiday Inn, in which they'd had some recent robberies, and they suggested do not leave the hotel after dark unless you have a large group of people, and so we went there, and we were supposed to be in the Hilton, but they said, who is this group of ISIS? We don't know anything about them. They canceled our reservation a month before the conference. We were lucky to find the Holiday Inn, and all they could have was a basement area for our conference, and it had a whole bunch of pillars to hold up the hotel. And so people said, were you at the conference founding meeting where you had to sit behind a pillar and couldn't see anything? Because it was a room, and we had 235 people show up at the first conference at the Wharton School. And so even though it was at the Holiday Inn, it was sponsored by the Wharton School, and our dinner was at the Egyptology Museum. And that's where we had the idea of having a wonderful time. So we had the amidst the sarcophagi of the Egyptian, and we had a harpist. And there we are surrounded by Egyptology and the harpist and the wine service. The secretary said, Eve and Jim Emery was the chair. Jim, you know how to throw a party. And the idea of having good parties at ISIS came from that reception we had at Egyptology. So then we decided that if we're really going to be an international association or group, we should be international. And so that decision was made in 1985 that henceforth it should be called the International Conference on Information System. We love that name, but of course it's something of a problem now. When we had ISIS in the US and we had some visitors from Europe, and they asked it when they came through immigration, why are you here? I'm going to ISIS. You know what I'm talking about? That the terrorist group in Iran. And so that therefore now people say, you don't say ISIS anymore, you say International Conflict Information System, so you don't get stopped at immigration. You're an ISIS terrorist? No. So now I mentioned the establishment of the MIS Quarterly, University of Minnesota. as that had a connection to SIM, the Institute for Management Science wanted to launch a journal. So therefore, they had Management Science, which is a very respected journal, Management Science, but they wanted to have a information science journal. And so they came up with the name Information Systems Research. And the question is, where was it to be launched? So I volunteered that UCLA would be the host of it. And so Bert Swanson, a colleague of mine, signed on as the first editor-in-chief of ISR. And it took him 3 years to be able to get a backlog of first-rate articles. And the first issue came out of UCLA for Information in 1990. So now we have in our field the MIS Quarterly and Information Systems Research as really the two pillars of research in our field. And recently they've named the Journal of MIS as the third one. But again, ISR from UCLA and Quarterly from Minnesota. Now, if we were renamed ourselves, we were actually going to be in a location other than the US. And so the way it works is that the person who is the chair of the conference committee one year becomes the chair of the executive committee that runs ISIS the following year. So I had been the conference chair of ISIS in 1986 in San Diego. And so that there for the following year, the question was, we had some bids for, they said, if you have got I in your name, why don't you have somewhere other than the US? And so we had several proposals, and the one that was most attractive was going to be in Copenhagen, Denmark. Now, the interesting thing was that this was somewhat controversial because they said, in San Diego, ETH, you had about 550 attendees, which the largest we'd ever had. That was a good turnout. You made money, and we had a good turnout of 550 people. People would have the travel budget to go to Europe, and there's not a tradition for conferences like this in Europe. If we go there, we're going to lose our shirt. And so there was a lot of resistance, number one, to having it in Europe, because they just thought that we'd only been in existence for 5 years, and that it could be really risky to commit to a program in Europe. And so the first part was, I said, well, look, that I believe business school should be able to run a business conference. And so we figured out that the surplus that I generated the previous year from my conference in San Diego was more than the surpluses of the entire 5 preceding conferences. And they said, oh, well, I didn't realize we'd made so much money. So therefore, if it's your money, let's waste it on going to Europe. And I said, it's not going to be a waste, but I think that therefore we have a cushion. And if we do have a shortfall, the money I made last year is enough to cover us in Copenhagen. And so the second question came up was that one of the things we do at ISIS, we have a doctoral consortium. And that this takes people who are at the dissertation stage and get together with the faculty group of mentors and help them in that last stage of their dissertation. They said, if we have it in Europe, we can't invite European doctoral students because their research traditions are so inferior to the American traditions that it'll taint any of the students who are in our doctoral consortium. Now that I'm quoting from one of the people who was at the meeting. I was appalled. You might know his name, I'm not going to tell you what it was, that he would think that therefore we can't mix American doctoral students with European doctoral students because that the American doctoral students would suffer because of the inferior. And I said, that's the most dumb thing I've ever heard. And they said, well, we don't want to do it then. We're not going to have it in Europe. And I said, all right, how about if in fact we have 2 doctoral programs, one for American students that have the talents that you claim they do, and another one for all other countries. And they said, all right, we'll agree to that compromise. They said, but we're doing it kind of risky. We're spending that money that you raised, that we thought we had a good conference, and we're going to do this experimental thing of 2 doctoral students. They nicknamed the conference McLean's Folly. So if it doesn't go right, it's your fault. And so that we said, I said, it's going to be fine. So the question was, what happened in 1990 in Copenhagen? The first question was that, did anyone show up? remember, I had 500 in San Diego. We were worried that that no one showed. 830 people showed up, the largest ISIS attendance ever to that date. We were at the Intercontinental Hotel in Copenhagen. They were expecting about 500 or 600. It was so crowded that all our meetings had standing room only. The banquet, you had to eat like this because you were standing up next to each other, eating like this because there was no ballroom to hold everyone. And it was a fabulous success in terms of the Europeans and the Asians that came, and about the Doctoral Consortium. It started in a hotel with the American students at one end and the other students at the other end. When they heard of each other's existence, they said, this is nonsense. They just stalked down the hall and combined the two, and de facto had one doctoral for all comers. And they said, we knew better than you did, and this was a dumb idea to think we have to have them separated. We learned from each other, we gained from each other, and from that point on, all the doctoral consortiums from ISIS have been on a worldwide basis ever since. But that happened, and we learned from in Copenhagen. Now, that was ISIS. Question is, who ran ISIS? Well, it was self-perpetuating. In other words, if you got to be a program committee or a doctoral consortium committee, then you worked up and maybe you got to be a chairman of the program, and then finally you got to be the chair of the conference. And they said that, but therefore you're selecting your successors. It's not a membership organization. We need to have an organization where people can join, where you can work your way up, and that therefore it's open to everyone to advance through there. And so after the success of ISIS in Copenhagen internationally, and the idea that we were planning on having a meeting in Amsterdam, so that therefore we said, we need to really think about making sure we involve people. And so at the Hawaiian International Conference on System Science, HICS, in Hawaii, we had a meeting, and Bill King and I and a couple of others got around beers late at night and said, well, we have a wonderful conference, ISIS, but we don't have an association which allows people to become members. And so that we said what would look like. And so Bill said, I'm going to organize its structure. And out of Bill's model came the idea of 3 regions, the Americas, Asia, and the Europe and Asia. And the idea that the leadership should come from that. So therefore, that the president would be from rotating each of the regions, so that therefore it would start in region 1, it'd be North America. Then the following year, the president would be from region 2 in Europe, following year, etc. So that was his model. Next question was, what do we call it? And I said, we could be the Institute. We went back and forth. And so I said, I suggested the Association for Information Systems, AIS, and the logo. And maybe you've seen the logo, the AIS logo on the globe. I designed that logo, the logo for AIS in a globe. And so they bought that. So that was the name, that was the association. And so it was founded. So we launched that. And so in 1991, we had the first people who could join ISIS and join AIS. And so that began to grow. And then we had officers. And so now from that initial group of people who joined, which we had about a couple of hundred, we now have about 4,000 members worldwide. And of course, it's become the organization for people to represent. Now, next question. So European Conference on Information Systems. Well, turns out that in parallel to what we were doing with ISIS, Europe decided they wanted to have a European conference. So they formed their conference in 1993 in the UK. It was completely standalone. It was run by a university in the UK in 1993. And it missed the following year because they couldn't find a university to support it. 1995, another came forward. And it was a small turnout, but growing in success. And so that later on, that it became affiliated. So even though it was founded in 93 as a standalone, later on it became affiliated. So we had the ISIS and ESIS, which is the European Conference, and I'll come about AMSIS later. So in that same vein, the same thing happened in the Pacific. The Pacific Asia Conference, they said, we want to have one. they started also in 1993, the same time that they did it in the UK, this time in Taiwan, as a standalone conference. They used Conference and Information Systems. They liked that, but it was either European or Pacific, Asian. And so that each of those for several years were on their own. They handled their own finances, but as they grew, why they decided that affiliation was appropriate. So now that the European Conference and the Pacific Asia Conference are part of AIS, as is, of course, ISIS. All right, moving along. That the Americas Conference, then, interesting enough, was founded within AIS, and that was the first conference was in 1994. So it was a year after either ISIS or Paxis, but it was in Pittsburgh, and that it was the one that now, which is for the Americas. And the question came is, what's the abbreviation for that? AMSIS. And people ask, well, why is it AM? Why not just the Americas, ACIS? Well, as we were starting to create AMSIS, we got an email from the Australian Conference on Information Systems. And they said, we've been holding for several years ACIS, the Australian Conference on Information Systems, but it's never been very big. It's never even 100. If you call yours ACIS, you will bury us. Everyone will think that therefore that, and so would you please not call yours ACIS, Americas? And so I added the M for Americans. So the reason why it's Americans, it's out of deference to the Australians that didn't want us to take the nickname ACIS. They want to keep that for Australian Conference Information Systems. And that's why now the idea is that the conference is called AMSIS, the Americas. And truly, by the way, it is. For a number of years, they were held in North America, Canada, or the US. But now we've had them in Lima, Acapulco, Cancun. And I've talked to Alex. I said, when are you going to have one in Brazil? And as you talk about this, that maybe the time is right to actually think about having an Americas conference in Brazil.
Guillermo is here with us.
What's that?
Guillermo Rodriguez is here with us.
Oh, Remo, yes. So anyway, that's that. So I just think that I'm so pleased at that. And so therefore, I volunteered to be the conference chair for the Americas conference in Savannah, Georgia. And again, we were talking about money. I said, well, again, we should make money. And they said, well, you're going to make money on this? I said, $93 million is what I made on that conference. So I've always believed that we must be financially viable. And when I run a conference, I make sure it makes money. So that now.
We certainly need your help, Eve, to make it happen in Brazil. We have tried twice.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's why, I was saying, if you want me to be a guest speaker in person, we'll have one after the pandemic is over, and I can come down. I can launch your conference in wherever you decide to hold it, etc. But anyway, so it was at Pittsburgh, and then that the question came up that AIS has a conference. It's collaborating with other conferences, but we don't have our own journals. Well, how about the quarterly? The quarterly is owned by SIM and University of Minnesota. There is no legal connection with AIS, and we should have our own journal. And so, by the way, SIM decided they did not want to be involved, and they sold their interest in the quarterly for $1 to Minnesota. So Minnesota owns it completely. But of course, we have a very close working relationship. But legally, the quarterly is owned by Minnesota. But we want to have one which are our own. And so therefore, we chose to have a journal of AIS, which is now increased in its. These two were started in 1995. And the communication is designed for short pieces, pedagogical work, practical applications. And Journal of AIS is a computer is in competition with the quarterly JMIS and ISR. And by the way, there's a lot of indication that the Journal of AIS may be added as the fourth premier journal. And it's come quite a bit along. So we now have our conference, and then we have the journal as well. Again, moving in, first it was SIG BDIP, SIG Business Data Processing. About 10 years later, they changed it from SIG Business Data Processing to SIG Business Information Technology. And then in the summer of 95, they changed it to SIG MIS, the name it has now. Chapters. Your chapter is represented. The question is what was the first chapter founded within AIS? And right close to home was here in Georgia. And so the first chapter was 1997. Now we have chapters in Latin America, chapters in Europe. We have dozens of chapters, and they've been very successful. But that first one, and interesting enough, what does the letter grit stand? You know what grits are? Grits is grind corn and makes a sort of a gruel, right? But we decided for that first AIS chapter, the Georgia Research and Information System Technology, GRITS, nickname for that. So, and then lastly, that Bill King had been running the headquarters of AIS out of his office in Pittsburgh, and he had some health problems. He was the first president of AIS, and he had health problems, etc. He said, I can't continue this. And so there was a national call, who wants to take over the job of hosting AIS? And the answer was that in 1997, that it was moved from Pittsburgh to Georgia State. And on top of that, and interesting, there was the separate organization for ISIS. When its administrative group, it was also moved to Georgia State. So therefore, I inherited at one and the same time AIS's headquarters and ISIS headquarters, both here. I ran them both. So I was the director of AIS. I was the director of ISIS, etc. But they were separate organizations. And they said, we really need to be combined. And so that I negotiated, therefore, and ISIS was actually incorporated in Illinois and Chicago, and AIS was incorporated in Pennsylvania. So I got all the lawyers together, and we actually had the incorporation in Chicago and the incorporation in Pittsburgh combined, and what actually happened was AIS as a corporation disappeared at midnight, and ISIS took over all of the assets of AIS the next minute, and the third minute, ISIS changed its name legally to AIS. And so it's a little bit, so therefore, at that point, I then became ISIS became part of AIS legally. And so that happened in 1997. And so we've had the organization. And so for the last 9 years, I've been the executive director running it from here. And then I stepped down to be the chairman of the IS department. And so, but we're still headquartered. So if you wonder anything about AIS, the office is right across the hall from me at my office at Georgia State. Okay, last slide. Oh yes, sad instance is that it turns out that computer personnel had a long run, but that I've got colleagues that were very active in that community. And the last issue came out in 1999. And so that it started back, as you say, it had about a 20-year run, and it was just folded in. So papers that used to go to computer science now go into database. AIS Fellows and Leah Awards. The idea was that we like to recognize that there are people that have distinguished themselves. And so in 1996, the Council of AIS decided they would establish 2 classes. One would be AIS Fellows, and these were people that were active in AIS and had distinguished themselves in furthering the aims of AIS as a corporation and the IS field. And so people that have been conference chairs or program conference chairs or journal chiefs, these were people that were recognized as, in fact, AIS fellows. And I was honored to be the one of the first 9 AIS fellows. That's so you saw on the introduction where I say FAIS, those are letters that often people used. And so that's a fellow of AIS. And so we're in the process right now of nominating fellows for this year. And so the awards are being made. I'm sorry, the awards for this year are being made, and they'll be opening up for next year's awards. And so people that are really outstanding anywhere around the world that done work in IS are eligible for a nomination for fellows. And I can think of 2 or 3 people in Latin America that certainly deserve to be nominated for AIS fellows. the Leah Award, I talked about Leo. These are people that are literally a lifetime award for outstanding work. And there are really just one or two a year that are awarded. So from 1997, there may be a total of only maybe 20 Leo Awards winners around the world, but it is most prestigious, etc. And I was wondering, I'm wondering, do I get to be an award? They say you can't be because you're the AIS director, and we don't allow anyone in a position of administration or on council to be awarded because they feel that you might influence the award. So you can't be awarded that because you're the executive director. I said, what if I step down next year? Because I'm going to be the president. Oh, then we can nominate you. And I was lucky because the following year I was awarded the Leo. So I've already developed this. In other words, when did they merge and they became one? Legally, that was in 2002. And at that point is when the AIS, as I say, absorbed ISIS and legally became one corporation. Student chapters, I've talked about national chapters that we've had a chapter at Georgia State, the University of Georgia, and there's a number of student chapters, in which case, and every year, the student chapter leaders get together and compare notes. And I've seen a number of chapters that have won the Outstanding Chapters Awards since they were founded in 2008. So the last 12 years, there's been a growth of student chapters, which have been very successful, and I'm very pleased to hear about that. Now, I mentioned that the 50th anniversary of, was it published? It came out in February of 2019. And so therefore, this oldest continuing publishing journal database has had its 50th year. And so that captivated. I did the 25th anniversary when I was the editor-in-chief of the database. And this one was done at the people at Baylor did the 50th anniversary. And it's again, I have a lot of fondness for a database because I have every issue. I was the executive director for 9 years, and I still have those copies. And if anyone is interested in a collection of all of those, etc., I'd be glad to talk to them. So now we've got 10 or 15 minutes to go. Where are we now? Well, we are in the midst of the great pandemic with ISIS now totally virtual. And therefore, it is going on, as we said, all over the world, nominally headquartered in Hyderabad in India. But I hope we're all hoping with the new vaccines that have been announced, that therefore we'll see you all face to face at the ISIS that will be held the following year. And at the same time, think about what might be a AMSIS meeting somewhere in Latin America in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's my an hour and 45-minute walk through history. And now I can open up to questions or clarifications to the extent which my memory will serve me, and listen to what kind of questions or comments you have.
Thank you very much, Chief, for your talk. While our colleagues and students are formulating their questions, I have a first question for you here. You know, about 10 years ago, when the internet was turning 40 years old, in 2009, I had the privilege to interview Leonard Kleinrock about that through the phone again, I think through Skype, I guess, at that stage. And I remember that I asked him, what were the things that in '69, when he was, let's say, putting the first brick on the wall of the internet, what he thought that if he had an idea of where we would get in 2009, right, which was the time that I talked to him. And he said, you know, we sort of already had an idea of where we were going. I could imagine most of the things that we get. He said, the only thing that I could never think of is that my mother, at that stage in 2009, my mother, who was 90-something, would use the internet to talk to her friends. Right? Yes. So my question to you is, what are the developments that we got in information systems that amuse you these days, and the things that you could not foresee in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s?
Yes. Well, by the way, did Leonard, did he tell you the story about, lo and behold?
No, well, it wasn't fasting. It was only 5 minutes. And remember, in 2009, it was a broken connection and everything, but I was able to do it.
To answer your question, clearly is about his mother is what has happened. The internet was for business. What is the internet now for? It's social media. And in fact, you might be interested with my work with Bill DeLone on measuring success. We're working right now a book on measuring IS success for social media. To answer your question now, is the idea the medium of exchange. In fact, the traffic is more for communication than computation. And so that therefore my answer is that, and
you're going the same direction. You also were not, you thought that the way that our society took hold of technology is what was possibly more difficult to foresee in the past. Yeah.
But the question is, the social media is really a double-edged sword. There, as we do our research, there's a lot of a dark side and downside. The misinformation, the number of people that are using the social media to rig elections, or the fear of a rigged election, and guess what? We're finding people are spending, especially with the pandemic, hours and hours on social media, right? And it gets addictive. And now there's a medical term for addiction, social media addiction, where people use it, or they get on and they, like with Robinhood, they play the stock market like it's a game. And so they're finding now that the same way people get addicted to gambling, people are getting addicted to social media. And so that breaking up families. And so with all the idea of keeping in touch with my grandchildren, which is lovely, I find out that yes, it can be addictive. And so the answer to your question is that the thought of linking the world through the social media is one that's a huge force. All the implications, good and bad, are still being sorted out. So we'll see. You can see our article when it gets published next year.
Anxiously waiting for it. Well, the mic is open. Whoever has a question, feel free. We're doing it differently to the way that we did in previous sessions, because Flavio was there to organize from the beginning. This time Flavio is with us right now, but he was not able to be with us from the beginning, and I'm usually more chaotic than he is in organizing things. So I didn't organize the way we usually do. Davidson is asking a question there. He says, although this year was totally atypical, do you believe that IS has advanced more than usual due to the pandemic, such as the use of technologies and remote access, faster developments to meet the needs, and so on and so forth?
Just an education, I believe, because everyone talked about online education, and we have a long history of that, but it hasn't taken on. It has forced us to get good at it now. And so our university has said we weren't ready to go online. We were forced to do so. We had a few effects, but going forward, given the progress we've made with the technology, why we're planning to do much more of our teaching in the future to be online, along with face-to-face. So the answer is yes. I think the idea of people working from anywhere or taking your courses from anywhere, that development made possible by the internet, is in fact a profound change, and I think the pandemic hastened it.
One of our participants here, Jose Antonio Gallardo, congratulates you, and then he also is concerned about the COVID-19, and he says, which impacts you expect from COVID-19 virtual reality that the whole world has to face this year? In fact, probably we could even summarize that in saying, in which way do you think that this pandemic will affect whatever we will do in the future in information systems?
Well, clearly, I think the way it's forced all of the companies to have people working from home. For instance, here's one example, that the hotbed of technology in the United States is Silicon Valley, right? So outside San Francisco, Palo Alto is the hotbed. But when in fact that an apartment will cost you $10,000 a month, how can you do that? And so with the internet, they're saying work from home. And as soon as I don't have to come to work, no, work from home. Then I don't have to live in Palo Alto. I don't have to live in Silicon Valley. And so companies are finding that all across the United States, there are within this year, technological hubs are in places like in Colorado, in Michigan, in Georgia, in Texas. They're saying that so it's the way the car as an invention created the suburbs. Now the internet, with the ability to work from home, is in creating a distribution across the country, and now places that are underfunded or underpopulated are finding they can compete. So the competitive straight, just the fact is that you can work from home means companies saying that you don't have to move to California. And you know that, did you read that Tesla is leaving California for Texas? And you think he has to stay there because of the talent.
Yeah, it costs much less, right? Yeah.
Yes, and companies, the film industry had moved from California to Georgia. That therefore more was spent on films last year in Georgia than any other state, including California.
Another question here by Orlando Bressan. Do you think that distance learning will overcome the normal teaching methods in the following years? Because now children do not adapt to these methods as well as expected.
I think the jury is out. You know, I've been teaching for 52 years as a professor, and I got good at doing it face to face. I'm not yet. I'm teaching a new course in the spring, etc., and I'm apprehensive because the technology doesn't always work, and student engagement is they can listen to me, but they can't talk to each other, and so the building a community, which is an important part of a university, is very hard. And so that my feeling is that I think there'll be a mix of face-to-face and electronic, but the electronic is going to have a lot more comfortable and having more accessible. And so the university, our university, is committed to having more and more of its stuff online to be able to reach out to people that can't come to Atlanta. But my sense is that therefore people will still want to have face-to-face. The argument, as I've seen, is that we have about, in fact, the Wall Street Journal runs a survey of universities, and it lists 1,000 universities, and it lists from Harvard and Stanford on down to, you know, West Overshoe. 1,000 things are ranked, etc. The prediction is that half of those will disappear within 10 years. And so that therefore the people that need that education will get it for less money electronically, and that the ones that want to pay for the privilege of going to football games and having parties and etc., the other half will survive. So I mean, that's a huge. The education will increase, but the increase will not be in face-to-face. In fact, there will be a decrease in a number. Universities are already closing now because of economic pressures, but the students need to be taught. My guess is that therefore we will see a two-tier, an elite group of maybe 400 or 500 universities that still offer face-to-face, still have residential programs, as well as online, and the rest will actually be very professional, virtual online programs, etc., that will actually be of Hollywood quality, not like the ones that we're still wrestling with here. Guillermo, you always have something to say. You want to ask a question? I can see your picture.
I think he went having dinner.
He left his picture on, but he wanted to have dinner. Oh, that's all right.
You know, this is a problem with this. He will show up. He will show up. I'm sure he will show up very quickly. It seems like Guillermo's gone. He left just his image there.
Yes.
Naughty boy. You know,
when I teach online, I think some of my students do the same thing.
Oh, you know, yeah, we just caught him, you know, right now here. But you know what I'll do? I will edit this part of the video.
I'm here.
He's there. He's saying he's there.
So do you have a comment or a question?
What about social inclusion and digital inclusion? Did you ever foresee that to be a problem?
Digital inclusion?
Or exclusion, if you want to see it that way.
Oh, well, you mean the haves and the have-nots?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
especially
clearly.
Now that everything seems to be so dependent on technology, and a lot of people don't have access to it.
Well, that's
so it's
true right here in the state of Georgia. That they've just finished a major bill that is to make sure that rural Georgia gets the same kind of connectivity they have in Atlanta. And so because we're finding that yes, it's the haves and the have-nots, and lacking bandwidth or lacking any access is denying some of the people the ability to use it. So you're absolutely right. Europe is so much more condensed. We envy them that therefore they don't have the huge distances that we do to have to make sure we have connectivity. But the answer, that's a real problem, and it's going to be expensive. And I read in the newspaper that the new administration has a high priority to greater infrastructure investment for technology. So Guillermo, maybe your question is that'll start to improve here. But the question is, there are huge distances in Latin America, in Mexico. How do you cover the whole country?
It's not only a matter of distance or physical distance, but also resources. I'm gonna give you an example. With the COVID-19, we realized at the university that probably 10-20% of our students don't have access to computers or internet at home.
Yeah.
So, and that means in a university of 360,000 students, you're talking about more than 70,000 students without access. So what do you do with that, right? I mean, you want to give, you want to move online, you want to transition online, but then again, you have to provide the means so that they have access to that online education, right?
Yeah.
So it's not only the fact that they are far away geographically, but also a matter of income, right?
Yeah, well, you need the endpoint, you need the technology to receive it, and then you need the network to distribute it. Both those cost money.
Exactly.
And so that therefore, I think that's a very, very real challenge, and one of which they're finding out they didn't think they'd have to do it because the pandemic came along. Now they realize we're saying stay home. And they say, then how can I be educated because I can't afford a laptop and you don't have connection to my village?
We know that it's been a very busy day for you. I'm sure that you always have an eye here and you have another eye at what is happening at ISIS. Maybe it's already over the day if we're considering the time.
That's right. It is over. Yes,
it's over there. But I would like to invite Flavio, that is the co-host to these research seminars here. Maybe do the formal thanking to you, and you will see. I will send you all what people wrote in the chat, so that you see afterwards. I'm sure that everyone appreciates it very much. And
it's fun to do it. I think back of all these things that some things I have, but many things I was there when they happened, like the the dawn of the ISIS and the other things that's there. But again, it helps understand where we are now when you understand where we've been before. So yes, this is my pleasure to give me an opportunity to think back over history with you, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much. And then Flavio will do the formal closing, not only of your presentation, but from the whole research series. We'll definitely do it again next year, right? So for those of you who like this, give us ideas, help us organize it, because it will definitely happen again in the future. But Flavio, the word is yours.
Yeah. Okay, Alexandre, thank you very much. Eve, thank you very much for your talk. It was very mindful. It was really good to hear from person who is in the field for the last 50 plus years. And it was really good to know how AIS was created, the chapters and the conferences. Now we are going to this conference that in the beginning you created. So it was really good to understand the way how you thought the conference would be, and then make a kind of comparison and see how it's going nowadays. And it was really good. It was really good to talk. So thank you very much for your speech. And we hope to have you here in Brazil and after the pandemic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good.
Fabio, also thank you for helping Alex to make sure the technology is working, and this worked like a charm. I see you all now. Of course, I can't see all 100, but I have 30 or 40 on the screen now, and that gives me a sense that they were real people listening to me, and not just some recording device. So that so anyway, thank you.
Right?
What's that?
Not just 3 red lights.
That's right, etc. Or 30 recording machines there. You've been very patient. I've held you for 2 hours now, and almost 2 1/4. I'll let you go. And for the season, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and that the new year will be an even better new year. We have the serums, we have the vaccinations, and that therefore maybe this pandemic will finally be behind us, etc. And we can actually we'll still have electronic. We'll have a chance though face to face. I still know how to drink a beer with people electronically.
Hopefully you know how to learn that.
Yes,
Thank you very much, guys. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next year. Thank you, Eve.
Okay, thank you for your attention.
Very much.
Next holiday.
Happy Christmas, Eve. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Thank you.
Tell me, how many people do you expect to show up to the room and or be logged in?
We usually have between 50 and 70 people. Right?
Good.
Yeah, it's going to be a crowd. Of course, the closest we get to Christmas, and besides, for some of the attendees here are students, and their classes actually went until last week. We told them that this would be a surprise, a bonus pack for those who persisted and stayed here for 1 week further. But one thing about Latin Americans is that when you say that it's 4 o'clock, that means that 4 o'clock is when they will start attempting getting into the room. Well, it was a surprise until yesterday, because yesterday a lot of people had already guessed, and they were already telling other people that if McLean would be with us. And then I said, well, if some people are already telling that, we better say yes, that's it. So be ready. You will be here with the history of information systems.
When I for a number of years, I would go in the summer, which is their winter. I would go down to Australia to teach out of at Adelaide University or around the country, and I say that and these were executive groups. These were not at universities, and I would talk to users and around the country in Melbourne and Sydney and Perth. And so they say, what is it that about you that likes my presentation? He said, well, you have a lot of advances in the US and a lot of things you try out, and there's a lot of exciting things we hear about, but you also screw up, and a lot of things you try out don't work at all. And so we like when you come down, because you're our early warning system. We'd like you to tell us the things that work and all the screw ups you did so we can avoid. We're maybe 2 or 3 years behind you. And so by describing the things you've done that didn't work, we know to avoid those and just try to emulate the things that did work. So I love the fact is that maybe that the development is not quite the same in Latin America as it is in parts of the US, but therefore, can I help you avoid the problems that we fell victim to?
All of that have been said, I would like to tell people that we are not red lights, and we are not dumb cameramen that are not interested, right? We are pretty much interested in what we're going to have here with today. So again, for those of you who are able technically to open your cameras, please do it. It makes it much easier for Professor McLean to talk to people and not to red lights or to bored cameramen. At least as a cameraman here, fortunately, I don't have to record it. It's all being recorded by the system already. But I will be here nodding and telling you that everything is working. If something doesn't work, then I will go like that and say, wait, we have Houston, we have a problem, right? All right. This is a historical moment for us at LACAI, the Latin American Caribbean Association for Information Systems, to have you here with us. People are still, if anyone still has questions, please do. I would just ask you to maybe just close your presentation so that we can see the people in the screen and we can take a photo of these moments. No?
Yeah.
So if you can just close the presentation, stop sharing the presentation, and at the same time, I will ask people that can open their cameras. Please feel free to do it now, so that if knows who's around, right? You can see there's a lot more, right? If you can probably pull to the side. We still have 50-something people around with us.
Well, I think today it's people will be on time. Because it's McLean,
Yeah.
Rumors of my death are true, just preliminary.